Continuing on with the tunnel portal installation, over the past week I have stacked up and glued pink extruded foam to build up the wall of the cut, and specifically went all the way up to hide the helix. Came in and scored all the rock face to make it look like it was blasted rock, just guessing that that might be what they did. Again, I have never been to the mouth of Simpson Tunnel. I know from railroad maps that I have that it's a stone tunnel portal. I don't know if it's cut stone or rough stone, but I assumed it was cut stone, so that's what I have. So again, it's assumption that they blasted everything, so I made pretty fine striations in the rock, tried to get some shelving that often occurs from blasting. Probably have a little bit more scoring to do up here to eliminate the obvious layers of foam, and then came in with some joint compound, that's 2 coats, just to smooth out the soil around the edges. So while you can kind of see up into the helix if you crouch down and look up there from the normal vantage point, more than adequate coverage, I think. So we will keep going on this, and once that joint compound's dry, we can start with the painting. Typically with the rock, as I've done before, I'll paint it flat black and making sure I get in every little crack with the black to make sure no paint, to make sure no pink shows. And then when I paint the browns and other earth tones for the rocks themselves, won't work very hard to get into the cracks, and that way the deep crack areas have a black tone to them that really helps add some shadow and depth. So, and then the area with the joint compound will get brown latex paint with some ground foam into it as a base layer. Then we'll add in the larger vegetation after that. So we'll keep going. It took about 24 hours for the paint to totally dry in all of the deep cuts and cracks in this rock face. So now we have it set up with the black latex paint. Actually, I can see 1 or 2 spots where I see some pink coming through, so I'll have to be sure to get those with brown when I come back with the next color. And this will be the probably biggest one-step transformation, where we paint the joint compound brown, and then we'll kind of start dry brushing the rock face with the same color, and then come back with some highlights in different browns. But this will start really making it look like topography rather than model parts. So we'll keep going. Alright, I've got a coat of latex brown over the whole area, both the smooth areas that'll get vegetated as well as the rock cut. Might have gone a little heavy. I tried not to get it all the way into the cracks so you can still see some of the black. I think it'll be okay. So now come in with some different shades of brown, and I'll really start trying to make those rocks look a little bit more random and natural. I'll use a different couple shades. Probably use acrylics watered down a little. I know there are others who use washes. I think the washes, my guess is, work really well on plaster type castings, because the plaster will absorb the color just like this tunnel portal. But on the foam, I've found that just using slightly diluted acrylic with kind of a dry brush type method tends to work reasonably well. This is some rock cut I had done on the other side. Obviously the geology here came down at an angle, at least that's what I'm modeling, so that's why the one side is smaller and maybe didn't suffer as much blasting. So there's some larger chunks of rock rather than the fine pieces that are left on this side. So it doesn't really show up real well on the camera, but there definitely are some deeper striations that I cut in with the knife that I think look reasonably good. So alright, I'll put together a couple browns and some other colors, and maybe come back with a light color like white or light brown just to do some highlights. We'll see how that goes. And then I'll come in and do the vegetation on the areas that don't have rock. Now I've come in and added the different colors of acrylic onto the rock face, and also put the base layer of foam on a course of a second coat essentially of brown latex paint. So that's usually what I'll do while the paint is still wet. I'll put a little bit of the ground foam just to create a base of the scenery. And scenery, at least in my experience, and the longer I do it the more I confirm that that's the case, is really an art of layers, and it's somewhat flexible as a result of that. And you know, when you do something and find that, oh, it's not quite how I'd like it, you can always come back, or usually you can come back and just do a different additional layers of the same technique or new techniques. So I usually work from the ground up, which is, you know, obviously the easiest way to do it, and we'll add, you know, larger and taller vegetation, you know, shrubs and underbrush, work all the way up to trees. But it's pretty important to get the base the way you want it and the low-lying stuff first, because obviously you can't reach through trees and shrubs very easily. So that's why on this hillside here that has been barren for a number of years, I left the trees off of it and didn't do much. Simply because I knew I'd have to come in and work on this tunnel portal. So this will all get vegetated, you know, down closer to the track level. I won't have this hard edge of where the trees just stop abruptly. And so I will continue to work the scenery in, and I think it'll tie together pretty nicely. One of the things I'm going to do, and I've done it on the left-hand side of the tracks here, on the right-hand side, as I was carving the foam, you get different sized chunks of foam that come out of that process. And I didn't save all of it, but I saved some. And what I'll do is I'll drop that in along the railroad ditch at the base of the rock, glue that in with some white glue or Mod Podge, and then I'll paint that in the exact same technique I used to paint the rock face, and then vegetate over top of that to show that some of the rocks had fallen before and vegetation and soil had accumulated there. But that will be exactly one of those layers I referred to. So it's starting to come together and look a little better than a pile of pink foam. So we'll let that dry and come back later for another step. So the next layer, as I mentioned, was to put some broken rock fragments or talus or just debris along the track left over by the erosion of the rock face. So these are just bits of leftover foam from the scoring process. I've put them down with the PL 300 adhesive, just put a big thick bead at the base of the rock cut and then gently sprinkled the bits of foam and pushed that into the PL 300 with my finger. And then any areas left over, I came back and used some fine, I think buff colored rock. And then this will probably get a whole coat of diluted Mod Podge over the top of it, but after the PL 300 sets up entirely, then it'll be ready for paint, and then I can come in with the next layers of vegetation. Using the same painting methods that I used on the rock face, I went over the loose fragments at the base, a couple different tones and shades, sprinkled a little bit of fine turf in there just while the Mod Podge was drying. I'll come back with more vegetation, although probably won't go too heavy on that rock face or the bottom of it. But you know, now that that's done, I start coming in and working vegetation in all around the tunnel portal. So I'll probably work above the portal first and then work my way towards the front. My foam rock cuts here are a little more geometric than I would have liked, so I'll try and soften that or break that up with some of the foliage. I now have the first layer of underbrush and vines and ground cover in. As I said, working from the back over the tunnel portal first, using the same materials as I've been. So I've got a couple different colors of foliage here to represent vines on the really steep area, kind of overhanging the rocks. I have a little bit of underbrush. This is polyfiber with green blend fine turf. This is coconut coir with, I think, weeds fine turf, and then I've got some shrubs that I typically use to blend into the backdrop, and then those materials are repeated along the bank. I've also come in and added some dead leaves for where the largely forested area is going to be, and then on the fringe of the forest, I've got the more of the polyfiber. And I keep playing around with different things. So here I actually used polyfiber in smaller clumps and just kind of layered it up to make more of a rounded shrub rather than the low mass of shrubs. I don't have any more trees created, so I will probably do one more round of understory and then maybe add in some fragments. I have some bits and pieces left over from the Scenic Express super trees, so I may come in along the edge with some of those understory plants. And then I'll probably wrap this up as I'm probably not going to delay this to make trees. Until I make some more trees, this is probably about as far as I'm going to get. Putting in as much of the underbrush and edge of the canopy type growth as I can. Obviously it'll be dramatically different once there are trees installed on all of the remaining areas. Did a little bit of static grass down low along the right-of-way. So looks a little bit more like a tunnel portal than it used to when you could see the entirely exposed side of the helix. So if I move over, it creates a little bit better view. But again, the trees, especially on the left-hand side in here, are really going to help shroud the tunnel and just add that extra little bit of vegetation. If I'm not mistaken, I think I hear a train.